Welcome to the Building Texas Show. I'm Justin McKenzie, your guide on an exhilarating journey through the innovation skyrocketing Texas to the forefront of the space industry. Texas isn't just reaching for the stars. We're building the engines to get there. In each episode, you'll meet the daring innovators and powerhouse companies turning what once seemed impossible into the everyday. The future of space is here, and Texas is leading the way. Welcome back to Building Texas. This week we are talking space again, and we're talking space in the studio because Eric Sundby, our guest, lives here in Boerne. And I am thrilled. Your background's really fun. We've had the opportunity to talk in the past, so we'll dive into your background a little bit, but we're going to talk about space mining, which I never, until I met you, had never thought about mining in space and what does that mean, let alone mining here. Mining on Earth is hard. Yeah. So we're going to dive into a lot of that. And then the continuation of our focus on the space industry in Texas. Eric is a great example and a great voice in that industry because he does have experience seeing what does the space industry need, where is it going, not only from like the government side of space and NASA and everything we know, but to the Space Force and what does that look like? And then what are you doing as an entrepreneur? So Eric, thank you for joining us in studio and tell us, what do you do in space mining?
Yeah. Thank you for having me. So space mining is an interesting field because it's definitely more on the horizon, right? It's not something that's happening today. Nobody is mining something in space and making a profit off of it. There are a lot of companies out there that like to think of themselves as businesses. In this space, but none of them really are, right? Unless they have a customer base. And so that customer base is practically non-existent in space right now.
What would you be mining? The moon? Asteroids?
All sorts. You technically... Well, there's no air.
No air, yeah. That's
unless
right.
You're on a planetary body, and not all of them. But it really depends. I mean, what you're looking for, right? And what kind of gravity environment you want to be in when you're mining. So all those play, there's a lot of factors that play into what exactly you can mine, but think of practically anything here on Earth. We have detected evidence of it in space, right? Whether that's in the asteroid belt with asteroids, whether it's with comets, or planetary bodies like moons and planets, right? Now, of course, we're talking about exoplanets. We're not talking about gas planets. You're not mining that unless you're in Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
You got those floating cities. But when you're looking at space mining, there's a lot of discussion about like, okay, well, who's the customer? Where are you getting this, this resource to, and what resources are you going for? Some are trying to go for water ice, right? And so, when you look at that, some people might be like, well, is that really mining? Well, yeah, it's a resource. Okay, so...
What would you do? You can get water ice here. What's the difference?
You can. So the difference is that we don't want to have to lug it all the way over there, right? So weight is costly.
Yeah.
So being able to find it and use it, what we call in situ, so on site or in the environment, enables us to do all sorts of things with it. A lot of people don't know, or if they haven't paid attention, H2O, right, water, can be separated and you can create all sorts of things with it. You can do special environmental systems. You can do fuel, right? So liquid hydrogen, liquid gas, not liquid gases, but you can make them
convert
into gases, yes. So you have liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen. And you can use those as fuel. So why would we want that? Well, maybe we don't want to have to be launching a lot of infrastructure off of Earth. Maybe if we want to go to Mars, maybe we can launch some things off the moon and make it a little bit cheaper, right? Yep. More cost effective for us to do that traveling. And so on and so forth. You have other resources that have been discovered. There's a lot of talk about helium-3 on the surface of the moon. That can be used potentially when we have developed nuclear fusion. I don't know when that's going to be. You hear the calendars all the time. People are saying it's 30 years out. It's all forward looking. And helium-3 is still used actively on Earth in many different sectors, and so it's not abundant on Earth. It's actually fairly scarce. So us being able to get it, use it, is really important. Now that's all, the concepts right now that you see is you generally see water ice, you see helium-3. There's discussion about using regolith, which regolith is for lack of a better phrase, soil. Soil, that's not what regolith is. Soil, it contains organic matter. Regolith doesn't, but that's essentially what it is, right? If you're comparing it to Earth. That's the topsoil, right? The very fine, loose stuff. That's really what everybody's focused on. Terraspace is a little different. While we are a space mining focused company, and I don't really want to say we're not a space mining company. I would actually say that we're like a mining services company. That's really what we are. We do mineral exploration, mineral characterization. The great thing about that from a business standpoint is that it is completely applicable to the mining sector here on Earth, or doing exploration off our planet, like on the moon or Mars, right? Generally planetary bodies, not necessarily asteroids.
And I've gone to your website. I've looked at a piece of hardware that I think is really what the magic is. And because my question coming out of everything we've just said so far is, how do you know regolith? Like, can you touch it? Have you felt it? Have we brought it back? Or is this kind of an exercise of what we think is out there and how we will use it? Like, how much of that is tangible? And then I think you have a hardware solution that really helps in today's mining world filter out and understand what it is they're getting, or what it is that potentially is at a site. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, you are in general. I mean, when you look at our solution to this issue, it's actually using hardware that is commercially available, so it's commercial off the shelf. The hardware solution is more so just putting them onto one system, right? So a lot of these, what we're doing is we're taking sensors that are generally used in the mineral analysis process, and we're putting them together, right? The real secret sauce, the bread and butter of what we're doing, is actually machine learning. So, you obviously, a lot of people are talking about AI. I really don't like that word and that phrase.
It's a buzzword.
It's a buzzword, and it doesn't actually mean what everybody thinks it means, right? It's not artificial intelligence. It's machine learning. We were able to train and teach an algorithm to understand pattern recognition, right? Generally using what's called large language models, right? So it doesn't have its own sentience, right? It's not self-aware or something. We haven't reached singularity.
Not yet.
And we definitely are not the ones that are searching for that. There are companies out there that want to. But we are using that kind of technique in what's called neural networks, right? So neural networks is the ability for you to do pattern recognition,
training and learning.
Train and learn, right? So it learns. Using that technology to take the data and the raw information from these various sensors, fuse them together, but then also provide you the analysis, which has historically been done with substantial human oversight. So you've had a lot of, geologists, geotechs sitting there in the lab doing the analysis,
which means cost and time.
And when you look at it from a space perspective, now you're having to take the human to that environment, right? So that goes back to your question of, do we have samples? Do we have, things that are from that environment? We do, from the Apollo era. The Chinese have a little bit newer samples. So Chang'e 6 returned a sample from the far side of the moon last year or earlier this year. Actually detected some stuff that we didn't know would actually be in the environment. Which was quite interesting. And so, for us, we don't have much from a historic standpoint to go off of. We only have what the Apollo missions brought back, which was good stuff, right? But I mean, we're talking about surface level. The deepest we've gone is, I think, to get specific, it's 2.92 meters, right? So we haven't even gotten to 3 meters yet. And
which is
from
like
the
6 to
surface.
8 feet underground.
Yeah.
And if you dig 6 to 8 feet underground here, I know what to expect.
Yeah.
But if you go a mile underground here, it's a completely different
environment.
value proposition.
Oh yeah, yeah. And so what's interesting is from our studies and understanding of the lunar environment, generally regolith, right, that top soil layer, doesn't end until about 5 to 10 meters, right?
Yeah.
I've heard other estimates 3 to
And then
5
it's
meters.
hollow inside, right?
Yeah, you know, some people are crazy and they think that. Some others actually think that the composition of the bedrock of the moon is probably not going to be much of value. But
Yeah.
the problem with all of these perspectives, obviously the hollow moon theory is far more problematic. But the problem with some of those perspectives is that we don't know. We've never actually been there, and it's really interesting hearing people talk with a lot of like authority on it.
Yeah.
And they're like, "This is what's there," and it's like we don't know that.
I mean, in history, there's only a handful of people that have been on the moon, and to your point, ours were a long time ago.
Yes.
In the early Apollo days.
Many of them are not with us anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a few left, you know, and yeah, so many of them, we actually are losing the people that we sent to that environment. We're losing our access to their knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Now, of course, a lot of
That's been taken and documented,
Yes,
but
it's
it's
been
still
documented.
the experience.
yeah, and nobody else on Earth knows what that's like.
Yeah.
So
That it really is interesting when you put it that way, because adversarial is the Chinese space program.
Yep.
And where I think a lot of people are confused, like NASA and Russia still work together scientifically interesting, and I think in a more collaborative way than we would think. But that is not the
possibly
case.
for now.
Yeah, well, see what happens. But that is not the case with the Chinese, and that's really the space race that we're seeing right now. And what you're talking about is incredibly valuable data, because that's how you build, that's how you create infrastructure. That's in the same way we would go build a building downtown San Antonio.
Exactly.
You got to go through the permitting, you got to go through everything. We're going to hope that that's the case out in space somewhere too.
But who's the entity
Who regulates
that regulates it, right? And the existing legal structures under the Outer Space Treaty and a handful of other treaties are not extensive enough to cover complex, development of cislunar space. I mean, this is not. So it is, in a way, there's some laws of the land, but it's still pretty wild out there, right? I don't know if I'm going to go so far to say it's the Wild West, but
the wild space.
but it's I mean, and I think there's actually a documentary now, Wild Space or something like that.
So
So
as the CEO of Terraspace,
yeah,
you've created this organization that is really looking at how can we do this more efficiently? How can we do this remotely, obviously? And then how do we ensure that when we are doing those activities, you're really finding the most value and bringing it back to whatever your future customer base will be?
exactly. So
But in today's world, I think you're helping write the regulatory. You're at least out there pressing up against the current regulatory environment.
yeah, we definitely are.
And is that the right position to think of early space commercialization, early things like the people that are going to build the launch pad on the moon? They figured out how to do that. They figured out what it'll take to do that.
Yeah,
Depending on what you know or where you are, like, when's that going to happen? But it's still going to go through a human process of bureaucracy, who has permission. It's going to be a global discussion as soon as somebody starts building, which is probably already happening. So, like, you're on the early forefront of how do we think about this, not only doing and creating or capturing, but legally.
yeah.
And you're positioned for that based on your previous career, and that's how you can talk about the treaties and everything else. You've been in the space industry for a while,
I have.
and you've seen it transition from, I don't want to just say DoD, but NASA, DoD, kind of a defense warfare thing, now to commercial aspect.
Yeah.
There's a commercial frontier here. You happen to think about space mining. Others are thinking about going to the moon and beyond. Others are thinking about satellites and how do we repurpose. You're all leading these conversations. And in your example, there's not a lot of tangible, how do we think about this? So as a founder, you're really unique.
Yeah. I've met a lot of founders in entrepreneurial endeavors across the country, mainly through my time, right? My previous career at the Space Force Association and other organizations. And I would agree. I mean, I definitely think that I'm a little unique compared to other founders because I have been deeply involved in policy, national policy. I've been involved in conversations that span a multitude of topics. So, from space to just national security broadly, to grand strategy as a country, as an allied system, to critical minerals, right?
Yeah.
And the issues that we have there. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely think I'm uniquely positioned with a lot of background knowledge and network across those different sectors that has been able to propel Terraspace to a point in which we are far ahead, from competing entities in terms of our reach, frankly. When you were talking about the treaties and the environments changing, going from opening up to commercial and stuff like that. When you look at that, a lot of people I think are. They look at space and they think, oh, well, it's out there. It's not. It's for the billionaires, or it's for I hear that all the time.
Got to be Elon or Branson or something.
And what I try to tell them is like, look, for lack of a better example, right? When North America was discovered, right? And I do come from Norwegian background, so I am by far, backing Leif Erikson on this, but. Clearly, he didn't get the word out as well as Columbus did.
It's a marketing problem.
Yeah, it's a marketing problem. When that happened, of course, there were massive changes in trade, in economic development, and even in negative things such as slavery, right? But what you saw was these were untapped regions that had not been, developed for food stuff, right?
Yeah.
I mean.
Just never infrastructure planned.
Yeah, what I always tell people is like, think of it this way: like Italy, you think of Italian food, right?
Yeah.
And tomatoes are central to that. Before Columbus went to North America, Italians did not have tomatoes in their cuisine.
Yep.
Okay, so they came from the Americas, right? And people, when they hear that, they're like, wait a second. So like, not even that long ago in relative human history, Italians didn't know what a tomato was. It was like, yeah, that's the case.
They really
right?
made the most of it.
Oh, they really have. They've done a great job with it. But my point, to use that as an example, is we're going to learn those same things. We're going to have those same kind of discoveries. Obviously, probably not with food, but with other kinds of resources, right?
You just look at the battery technology that's so dependent on lithium.
Yeah.
And now you might have a whole different elemental set or combination of stuff that come in
or access to larger swaths of things, right? I mean, there's a lot of discussion of platinum and palladium, right, in the asteroid belt. Well, those can be used in battery technologies, but right now it's too expensive, right, because it's so rare on Earth. So you have a lot of discussion about what potential, changes we're going to see in our society, in our civilization, simply because we have access to new stuff, right? Now, thankfully, right, back to my point with the New World, right, and discovering it, there were a lot of humans involved, right? And so there's always that discussion of like, well, the colonization back then, there was humans and there was clashes and there were a lot of forced starvation, all these other things. The great thing about space is that so far there is no other species beyond our planet in our solar system that we know of, right? So when we go and access these things, you're not really impacting other people, right?
Yeah. Or native population.
Or native populations of any kind, right? Yeah. So that's not even part of the equation in this, which makes it even more attractive, especially in our modern world where we've been able to look back in history and that's the great thing about humans compared to compared to all the other species on the planet, we can look back in our recorded history and think, oh, maybe we should have done this or that, or maybe this shouldn't happen, right? Like
you can hope we learn.
You can hope, right? But we're able to analyze, right, in that way. That being said, that's not going to negate competition, right? And so to your point earlier about China and the space race, especially with resources, when you look at what China's done recently, it's been very effective at building up a coalition to not be thinking about low Earth orbit anymore. So not to knock the Russians too much, but when I did say earlier, I was like, for now, the reason I said that is the ISS is not going to be around much longer.
It's old.
It is old.
I didn't realize how old that really is.
Yeah.
But it's almost 40 years old.
I think the first module was brought up there, and I'm not an expert on the ISS. I think it was brought up there early to mid 90s.
Yep.
So, I mean, yeah.
It's getting there.
It's getting there. But again, right, like, it's been up there that whole time.
Just think about getting in a car that's 40 years old. Like today, it's a very different experience.
Very much so.
Can you imagine you're going to go live on a spaceship for 6 months that was in that same era? Like,
yeah,
a Mustang 2.
Yeah, like, right. Oh. Well, that's like, you see the SpaceX Dragon coming up to the ISS, and it just looks from the outside, you're like, that's newer, right, than this thing.
It's multiple generations newer.
Much more so. Yeah. And so things are changing. That platform is no longer going to be there, right? Yeah. And China has been very proactive in working to build a relationship in space with Russia. Yep. And their first goal was to create a treaty-based organization called, and it's a lot. It's called the International Lunar Research Station Organization. They could have come up with a better name, but
that's their new space station.
That's for the moon.
That's their lunar.
That's their lunar. That's their lunar base, and they partnered with Russia. That was their first goal. Was let's get Russia on board with this, so Russia doesn't try to go join the Artemis program that the U.S. Has created under what's called the Artemis Accords. That's our loose agreement that we have with other countries.
And that would be European space agencies, Japanese, Australia is a big space agency that's coming in. So you're seeing the worlds align around this one or that one.
Yeah, and so that's why, like, when I tell people, I'm like, this isn't necessarily what I want to see happen, but if you want to go look at a good example, probably go check out For All Mankind. Yeah. And you'll see kind of how there's these geopolitics are going to play into this. And the reason I brought all that up was you talked about commercialization. When we look at other domains, we look at the sea, right? Mm-hmm. We look at land, we look at air. These are all military domains, and they're also all domains for commercial activity. We have shipping, global shipping.
Protected by the U.S. Navy.
Protected by the U.S. Navy. Yeah. We have airlines that are protected by air defense zones and national airspaces and our air forces, right? And
those jets show up quick if you're in the wrong spot.
Exactly. Yeah. So, all of those areas are militarized and securitized. Space has been militarized for quite some time. It's just humans haven't really reached out past the moon, and particularly past low Earth orbit, and geo for a long time, right? And so as we do that, of course, these kinds of entities are going to go with it, and there's going to be geopolitical competition. Yeah. There's geopolitical competition in every domain on Earth.
Shipping lanes in space. I mean, you mentioned Star Wars earlier as the floating planets, but I mean, I give them credit for thinking about, like, they gave examples of commerce in space, and they might be wild and kind of out there, but for what you're talking about, it doesn't seem like it. It seems like we've still got to treat it. We should. We should continents and like just governmental spaces. We should. Now, of course, that's a personal opinion. There's a lot of people who have very, very different opinions on this. Some people think that space is this sacred place that, human conflict cannot go to. It's already there. But what I try to tell people is like, wait a second, this is the only planet we know sustains human life, and look what we've done to each other on it. Yeah. So what makes anybody think that we're going to avoid that going elsewhere? We're going to leave this room and go be nice in that room. Yeah, in the room that, like, wants to kill us all, right? Like, it's a vacuum, and it's like,
I don't know. I think that
Two Fish, an astronaut,
yeah,
explained to me.
Good friend.
He explained it is not a peaceful place.
No.
Everything out there, just the existence is trying to kill you.
Yeah, I mean the vacuum, the temperatures, the fact that you have no protection from
random space trash.
Random junk, trash, meteorites, anything, right? Radiation, stuff like that. I mean, our planet.
Turns out our atmosphere is really protective.
It is. I mean, it's like the force fields you see in Star Wars, exactly. Right? So, this is the one place we know absolutely can sustain us. I'm sure there are other places. I mean, when you look at the numbers and you see how much is out there in the universe, I'm sure there's other places that can.
Statistically.
But we're not there, right? And thinking that we're somehow going to suddenly just get along in space, but still be willing to kill each other on the one place that we call home, I'm skeptical. But we don't need to go down that route.
So let's bring it back to Terraspace, though, because you are on that frontier. You're on that edge as an entrepreneur putting this together for all the right reasons. Mm-hmm. But you still have an obligation to a stakeholder or investors at some point. What is your actionable work today? And do you take investors? Is this something that you're out looking for investors to say, come on board? And what kind of investor is that? It says, sure. Hey, I'm investing in the future of this.
Yeah, so we have a long-term vision. Obviously, you've heard part of it, right? Yep. Which is to be able to go and conduct mineral analysis on site in these crazy environments like the moon and Mars. But we recognized very early on that if we wanted to be a business, we wanted to be profitable, we wanted to be sustainable financially, we needed to find customers.
Yeah.
Right? Well, the customers aren't really in the space domain right now, right?
Right.
But the mining sector is old. It's one of the oldest sectors out there, right? Things have changed, of course, with maybe how we discover and extract minerals. But we like to say if it's not grown, it's mined. Yeah. So anything in your environment, I mean, this building and the vast majority of stuff inside of this building came from mining.
Drywall is a good example.
It's a very good example. And
that is all mined material pressed into a value that we know is drywall.
Yeah, and everybody uses it in their homes, right?
So they never think about it.
No, they never think, and that's the kind of sad thing, I guess. With the mining sector is it's so important to every single person in this country, in this world, because it makes everything this, like that we're talking on, your glasses, right? Your wedding ring, it all comes from that. And we just don't think about it at all. But it's a really, really important sector. So the great thing is it's a fairly mature sector. Space is kind of in its infancy. It's kind of grown up into a toddler right now. But mining, it's been around for quite some time. And so there's a lot of established companies that need mineral analysis conducted throughout the entire life cycle of their mine. Every single mine has to go through this. So that is a massive market. I think it's just mineral analysis and exploration itself is about $30 billion a year spent just on that. We're talking about a $5 trillion mining industry yearly. And so these customers are in droves, right? So we've already partnered with a handful of companies to offer them our services. We have partnerships with some of the largest mining companies on Earth to conduct analysis for some of their mine sites or even across their entire company enterprise. Now, of course, we definitely have competition. Competition is mainly older labs. There's a couple other companies that are kind of interested in what we're doing that definitely don't share our long-term vision. But when it comes to investors, like you asked, we definitely are seeking investors. We've gone through our pre-seed phase. We've built out our tech, right? We're in our seed round right now and raising. And the kind of investor that we'd be great to be a partner with is really anybody who's interested in, I mean, if somebody's interested in commodities, right, then they'll understand how important mining is. They'll understand mineral exploration to an extent, right? I mean, maybe they don't understand exactly how it's done, but they know that it's important. So people who are interested in commodities, people who are interested in deep tech, people who are interested in national security. I always bring this up. 90% of our minerals, our critical minerals particularly, but even minerals across the industry, come from China. So when you hear, you hear it a lot right now. We're in the middle of an election. Everybody's talking about manufacturing and bringing back manufacturing. To me, that sounds great, but it just doesn't really mean anything to me. Why? Because the source material that goes into that manufacturing process all comes from China.
Global supply chain.
Exactly.
All starts.
So if the supply chain is controlled by your adversary, you can manufacture as much as you want. You have no control over your frankly, your country at that point.
And we saw that in COVID, and it wasn't adversarial. It was
Exactly.
just shipping and labor hiccups. But how quickly did things disappear?
Yeah, and even that when that one ship ran aground, right, in the Suez, it
stops the whole channel.
That blocked global trade.
We're all so dependent on that.
Yeah.
And I think of like silica. Silica is such an important product. A lot of it comes out of the Korean peninsula.
It does. Yeah, there's a lot of it.
But that's all of our electronics. That's all these solar panels that you're seeing. That's so many things that if you don't know how it's made, you wouldn't know that that's silica.
Yeah. And when you look at, people will look at environments and say, well, we can completely decouple, and I'm not going to get into geopolitics here, but, we can completely decouple from these countries and be self-sufficient. And the answer to that is just no, you can't. Like, as much as you want to.
North Korea is a good example of doing that. And here's what they've done.
Exactly, right? There's all these countries that have mineral assets. Afghanistan, for instance, is kind of like the breadbasket of the world for minerals.
Yep.
And China, the moment we left, China swept in, and they've activated mines that we never even touched. We didn't look into that.
That wasn't our infrastructure goal. We were there to build a society.
Yeah.
They are there to mine.
They're there to mine. And
they're doing the same in Africa, by the way.
Yes. And they call it Belt Road, right? And so, of course, they're going to go in and they invest and they build infrastructure, but they're not necessarily interested in the governing structures of these countries. They just want to really access those resources. And so what we're interested in, right, and what we have partners to work on with like particularly a geological survey here in the country is to explore our own country for more minerals.
Yeah.
About 80% of our country has been unexplored.
Yeah.
Believe it or not. A lot of people don't know that.
Just look at Alaska. How much of Alaska has been untouched?
Yeah, well, and even here in Texas, right? A lot of people will say, well, we don't have minerals. And it's like, wait. We have a lot of minerals, but there's also areas that we probably haven't even explored for. Think about where all the oil and gas is out West Texas.
And then the large private properties that sit on there.
And when you go and explore for oil and gas, you're not exploring for minerals.
No.
You're exploring, you're exploring for, oil, but you're not looking for hard metals or other things like that. There's a lot of uranium in Texas, right, south of San Antonio. So there's a lot in this country that hasn't been looked at. And so that's what we want to do first and foremost, as well as in other countries that we have close relationships with. Cobalt in Chile is a big one, right? Oddly enough, you have a lot of aluminum, titanium in Ukraine that people don't know about. And they have one of the largest untapped areas for that mineral. And so when you look at this from a national security perspective, it's like, okay, that's going to become a hot topic, right? And there's going to be a lot of interest in exploring for those and potentially mining them, right? So if investors are interested in that kind of stuff, there's going to be a lot of activity from the federal government, state governments, and just mining companies in general. I will say it's a little hard to mine in the United States. Our regulatory system, like you're talking about, is really, really intense. It can take sometimes 15 to 20 years to get a mine operational from when they first wanted to start. So like imagine someone could literally spend their whole career there and like retire and they don't,
never turn dirt on the site.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that I've heard of that happening before with a couple of mines that have just taken so long. So we are engaging with, members of Congress, with USGS, on how important this is, but we also engaging with partners all around the world. But like I said, back to who might be interested in this. Anybody interested in the frontier, is what I would say. So something new, something innovative, something that has a large market that is going to be disrupted by what we're doing. That's, we definitely want to hear from you for sure.
Beyond this interview, where can somebody find more information about the topics that we're talking about? Sure. I mean, Terraspace to begin with, but then just what's happening on that frontier, whether it's mining on Earth or mining out in space. You're going to be a great start point on your website, and we get to that in a minute, but where else would you send people?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at space, I would definitely check out some of the companies that are really focused on accessing the moon and others. So you mentioned earlier Two Fish, which he's a former NASA astronaut, Air Force test pilot, great guy, good friend, works at Intuitive Machines. Mm-hmm. Check out Intuitive Machines. They are an amazing company that are building landers to access the moon.
They had one land in February.
They did, right? And I think their next one is slated for January.
Yep.
So definitely watch for that, because that's just going to be exciting to watch. But check them out, see what that, what's going on there. SpaceX Starship, right? We saw that fifth flight test out of Starbase where it caught it. And of course, the whole world now is like, wait, what's going on?
Yeah.
Right? And it's so funny when something crazy like that happens. That's what gets people's attention, but that's what it takes.
That is also what SpaceX has done brilliantly.
Absolutely.
Make it a conversation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They've done a tremendous job at that. And so check them out. Understand, read into what Starship's capable of. This thing is designed to take 100 people per flight into space, right? Up to 100 people. Of course, there's going to be modifications needed in certain things. 100 tons, 100 plus tons per launch. This is, I don't want to be too hyperbolic when I say that it's a light bulb kind of moment, but when that technology is usable, right, and human rated, and we can use it consistently, nobody knows how much that really is going to open up the frontier of space.
Or 20 years later, it might be casual to go to the moon.
It might be casual. I mean, your neighbor might casually go for work. You don't know. And so that's really exciting. Science fiction informs a lot of reality.
Star Wars.
Right? Star Wars is definitely fun, and I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I would say check out For All Mankind.
Yep.
I just think it's super realistic in what could be. Of course, there's here and there, but it's science fiction. But check it out. That kind of paints the picture of the geopolitics and also the potential economics of what it could look like in 30, 40, 50 years, right? There's so much more. I mean, the CSIS, which is the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or a think tank, they have the Critical Minerals Security Project. Go check that out. That just launched, I think, a couple weeks ago. So now they're pushing out content and information where you can learn about what are the issues of critical mineral security in the West particularly, but also just in the world.
Which, if you're in electronics manufacturing, if you're in innovation, you should probably be thinking about that.
You should, because this is going to impact your supply chain.
Yeah.
So, that can inform you where you can invest, even for broad investors, right? I mean, maybe look at some mining companies, look at some commodities out there. We are entering the metals age, right?
Yeah.
And they're going to dominate everything we do. So, get in while you can and look around at what's happening in this space. The mining sector is ripe for massive amounts of innovation, but it's a unique sector compared to others in the fact that it's been around for so long. So, yeah.
There's a lot of innovation to find in industries like that have aged and they've built wealth over generations. And now what's the next phase of that going to look like?
Exactly.
So your website, where would we find you?
Terraspace.com. So it's Terra, Earth, right? So TERRA space.com. Yeah.
Perfect.
You can check us out. We're doing some construction on the site. So really all you're going to see right now is a video, but it kind of gives you an understanding of what we do, how we do it, and why.
Yeah.
So.
And really focuses on that large language model.
It does.
And the neural network of what can we learn? How can we be more efficient? How can we get there faster?
Yeah.
And I so appreciate that you are working on that, because I don't know anybody else that would be. So
well, thank you.
Eric, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming in and for all the work that you've done and to this point. But now you're on an exciting walk into the frontier. And I think leading us in ways that I've learned in this conversation, the regulatory frontier, the minerals and what's out there, and then how do we do it?
Yeah.
And when you put all that combined, I'm excited about what Terraspace is thinking about, what you're building. And I hope you'll find some people that want to come along with you and say, what is the art of possible here?
Yeah. Thank you very much. And I'm really excited for this journey ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for enjoying this episode of the Building Texas Show. We release a new show every week. We're talking to innovators, leaders, and trailblazers from across the state doing incredible work. If you know someone that might be a great guest, please let us know. It's important to stay involved, to stay in touch. Please like and subscribe to the Building Texas Show across social media platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn to stay on the cutting edge of what's happening in Texas and the space industry.